listening to the GM Shuffle with Michael Lombardi, presented by DraftKings and VSiN.
Welcome into the GM Shuffle with Michael Lombardi. I'm Grace Remington, getting you ready for Week 5 NFL action. Today is October 3rd, and that means something very good for us football fans, Michael. We have 55 straight days with a football game at the NFL or college level until November 27th. It's going to be an awesome time. What are you most excited for?
But, I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to watch some of these shows I need to watch on regular TV because I only have Tuesdays and Wednesday night to watch them, and now I can't. Now I'm going to have to watch football, which is awesome. I mean, there's nothing better than fall. There's nothing better than seeing the leaves change, Halloween. All those things, to me, are great. And then football added into it, it's just the best time of the year. It really is. You have to enjoy it. And the weather on the East Coast this time of the year is tremendous.
It is. Yeah, I'm waiting for it to get a little bit cooler here in Nashville so the leaves can start changing color. But you're right, sweater weather, get a good bowl of chili, curl up on the couch, watch some of these games, especially these Fun Belt and Maction games on a weekend or weekday night. I mean, they get pretty wild. So we got fun times ahead of us. But first we got a Thursday night game to preview tonight between the Bucs and the Falcons. This line has been steadily moving the Bucs way throughout the week as the Falcons opened as a 3-point favorite. That line now down to 1.5. What is the key matchup for you in this game?
Well, I mean, look, for all the talk about the Falcons and all their drafting of offensive players, they've held the ball for 24 minutes in these games. They can't control the football, partly because they can't convert third downs. I mean, they've only converted 10 third downs all season. Can you imagine that? And they're a good run team. They're 10th in the league in rushing attempts, but they can't convert it. And so they've only played 215 plays in 4 games. Now, that's really basically about 55 plays per game, and they can't control the ball because they can't stay on the field on third down, and they can't make an explosive play, even though they've been drafting all these number 1 receivers. And this will be a challenge because Kirk Cousins under pressure on another night game for him. Todd Bowles is going to bring the house, and I think he's going to have to play really well. Now, one thing about the Bucs, you can run the football on them. I think that's going to be the key is that the Falcons have got to find a way to convert third down, to stay on the field, to keep their defense, who's missing Troy Anderson, who made that play last week, off the field. Because I do think the Bucs, will be able to run the football more effectively than they ever had. They won there last year. And then these receivers, and one thing about Atlanta, you got to attack them outside in. You can't attack them from the middle out because of Bates' ability to find the football. And that's where the Bucs are strong. They're strong on the outside with Godwin and Mike Evans. So I think it'll be a fun game. I think it'll be an adjustment game. I know Todd Bowles is really good at attacking the protections. He did it from the first play of the Jet game to the last play.
Yeah, you mentioned Kirk Cousins against this tough defense. I didn't realize this until someone said it out loud. The Falcons have already had 3 primetime games this year. I don't know how that happened on the schedule, but yeah.
They gave $100 million to Kirk Cousins, and they convinced everybody in the world they're just one player away from being a good team. And so they became the eye of the South. And so, look, I think they're fortunate to have won 2 games. Now, they're fortunate that they were unfortunate to lose to Kansas City, but they were fortunate to beat Philly. They were fortunate to win last week against New Orleans. And so they're going to have to get better. I mean, they're 29th on third down, and they're 29th in the red zone. So if they don't improve in those areas, if they don't find more – look, I don't know. Drake London averages, 10 yards a catch? I mean, they can't find Kyle Pitts. He's in witness protection, but he belongs there. I mean, he can't play. See, here's the biggest problem. People say, what's wrong with Pitts? What's going on? Well, Pitts can't block. Okay, so that's a given. And then he can't win one-on-one matchups against a corner in the slot, even though he's got great size. He doesn't have that ability. So he needs zone coverage. He needs somebody that he's going to have free access, and then hopefully he can make a play. But people don't match up to him. They're not threatened by him. If you put him on the field and you're hoping to get them to play nickel, well, then you run the ball. But they don't really care. They count him as a receiver. And he can't run the ball to his side. So he's been a liability. I mean, he's the 4th or 5th pick overall in the draft. They picked him over Mike. Imagine the defense they could have in Atlanta if they would have picked Micah Parsons and Jalen Carter. Think about that now. Think, and then I don't know, put somebody else in there besides Drake London. I mean, the fact is they're not explosive offensively either. I mean, their best offensive player is Moody, the wide receiver. So in terms of making explosive plays, and that's why they can't. And then they can't stay on the field. They just can't. And then they can't close the drive when they get it down there. I mean, look, last week they kicked 4 field goals. The first game of the year, what did they kick? They had scored 10 points. They're playing at home. They can't score points.
Okay, I want to talk a little bit about the other side as well, just to give some love to Baker Mayfield, because I mean, he's playing with some swag again. He's definitely looking comfortable. He, of course, had the little back and forth with Brady about bringing joy to the program, but it's neither here nor there. How do you rate his performance so far? Because you look at the games the Bucs have won, they're not too impressive. I mean, they beat the Lions 20-16, maybe got a little lucky there. They beat the Eagles in the rain without a healthy O-line and wide receivers and scored just 7 points at home against the Broncos. So the schedule, when you break it down, really not as impressive as it seems. But it's hard to root against Baker.
I mean, Washington's 3-1. I mean, they held Washington. They dominated Washington, which we didn't think was very impressive until 4 weeks later when we realized Washington might be a better team offensively than we gave them credit for. I'm not sure they're good on defense. Look, I think Tampa's really well coached defensively. They can, they attack the protections of the opponent really well. I mean, he outcoached Kellen Moore last week. Nobody will say it because, God forbid, if you said a bad word about the joystick, about his brilliance as an offensive coach. But, I mean, they attack the Eagles' protection from the first play of the game on. I mean, it's the same thing Vance Joseph did against the Jets' protection. So when you have a coach that can do that and he's not afraid to blitz and he can hold up on the outside against the receivers, I mean, who scares you in Atlanta? Who scares you? Who's going to scare Todd Blitzen? Moody, okay. London's not going to scare him. Pitts isn't going to scare him. I mean, they got to control Bijan coming out of the backfield. They know they have to do that. So, look, they're a really well-coached team. When Vita Vea's in there, they play the run better. They're physical up front. I mean, they beat up Philly. I mean, Hurts took a beating in there. And, I know they didn't have Lane Johnson, but I think to me, they're very good at tackling. They average only 9.3 yards per catch. The opponent only averages 6.0 per attempt against them, and they're 7th in the league in pass defense. So if Cousins is going to have a good day, he's going to have to stay in that pocket and make tight throws.
Right. Okay, let's get into our NFL news and notes presented by Smirnoff, the world's #1 vodka. Please drink responsibly. This has really been the biggest news of the entire week. Davante Adams informing the Raiders he wants to be traded. That is according to multiple reports. And it also comes after Antonio Pierce was caught hitting like on an Instagram post suggesting that Adams had played his last snap as a Raider. The like was later removed. Don't you just love all this social media sleuthing, Michael?
Yeah.
I think it is worth monitoring, though, in this day and age. But then the Las Vegas Review-Journal later reported the Raiders have started reaching out to other teams to gauge their interest. The Jets and Saints, though, apparently at the top of Davante Adams' wish list. Well, you had talked about this back in February. Why do you think this is all just coming out right now?
Well, because, the rubber meets the road, right? He's been trying to get his contract redone for a while, right? He's been trying to add more cash into the deal. His last deal was 5 years, $140 million that he signed. It's still that current contract. But he's watched other receivers get deals, right? And when you're Davante Adams, you still think, even though you're 32 years old, you still think you belong in that category. And the Raiders have a huge, they're on the hook for another, I think, $40 million of acceleration on this contract. And so his level of play is certainly declining. You can't deny that. He's always seems to be covered. Now, he has great eye-hand coordination, don't get me wrong, and he still can make plays. But in terms of being an explosive player, I think those days are over with, especially as he gets older. He didn't like Josh McDaniels. He basically wanted him out of there, and he embraced Antonio Pierce. Everything was great. But this is a situation where, Davante Adams isn't going to be happy winning 35-0 if he don't score points. He's not going to be happy winning 10-0 if he scores points. And so this was a collision that was going to mount itself. Antonio Pierce, as we've talked about here on the pod before you arrived, Grace, he steps into a tough job because there's been no interim coach other than Doug Marrone and Jason Garrett that have gone on and sustained success. You go from the substitute teacher to the permanent teacher, and now the classroom wants you to act like the substitute teacher. Well, you can't act like that anymore. And so now Pierce is trying to do things. I mean, he's even holding a game sheet on Sunday. He's out there with a game sheet, like he's calling the game, which we know isn't going to happen. But at least he's trying to act like a head coach, and he's got a locker room that's resenting him because what they saw last year isn't what they're seeing this year. So it's a problem. Look, I know this for a fact. Every guy that went in there to interview with Ken Herock and Mark Davis and all the people at the Raiders for the GM job said the time to trade Davante Adams is now. And I don't know if Tom Telesco did or not, because, I don't think Telesco was one of those people, but he could have been. I mean, but, the reality was they wanted to trade him. But remember, this was leaning towards Champ Kelly being the GM. But once they realized that Champ Kelly wasn't ready to be the GM, they tried to get Telesco to become the assistant GM to Champ. He turned them down. So they made him the GM. And then once they did that, and then they brought him in, I don't think Mark Davis wanted to trade the player. Look, I think they're a better team without him, but they're not going to trade. They're not going to be able to dump this $13 million that he's owed, Grace, to anybody. Who wants to take on $13 million and then give away a high pick? Now, will the Raiders make the pay? Will the Raiders pay? I don't know. But I think that, to me, there's one team here. It has to be the Jets. The Saints, I think, would be interested, but they're $100 million over the cap next year. How do you trade away an asset for him and then have to take on the contract? Well, maybe the Raiders will pay for it, but then no, you're not. He's not going to be on your team next year because you got to cut him because you can't afford him.
I feel like the Saints are so good at navigating cap space, though. Couldn't they work some cap magic if they really wanted this to happen?
Well, they would. The only way they could work it is if the Raiders would pay for the bulk of it. Then they could get them to come in there. But here's the problem: if you're trading away a third-round pick or a second-round pick, it's a one-year deal because you can't get around that magic next year. Now his base salary is $35 million. You could lower his base and you could guarantee it all and make his number like the Saints do. They pay on credit card for everything. I mean, they're the greatest Fifth Avenue shoppers of all.
Intriguing stuff, and we'll be watching it in the coming days for sure. Coming up next, more NFL news and Michael's writing spotlight. This is the GM Shuffle.
You're listening to the GM Shuffle with Michael Lombardi, presented by DraftKings and VSiN.
Welcome back into the GM Shuffle presented by Smirnoff. We do game days. Please drink responsibly. The Smirnoff Co., New York, New York. Let's get into some more NFL news and notes here. Over on the East Coast, Bills edge rusher Von Miller suspended 4 games for violating the NFL's personal conduct policy. The Bills essentially at a pick-em right now, playing at the Texans. How does Miller's absence impact the Bills' defense here?
Well, a lot of that goes to the relationship of how the game is going to go, right? I think, to me, the Bills are missing so many people on their defense. It's kind of unfair. They don't have Terrell Bernard. They're missing Taylor Rapp this week and Teron Johnson, their nickel corner, who's very good. They're missing him. But one of the things you look at the Buffalo Bills is up front, they're very small. I mean, this is a small team. I think they're one of their biggest guys. I mean, when Derrick Henry went crashing through the offensive line and into the Bills secondary, he might have been bigger than everybody from the linebackers on back. He might have been bigger than some of the defensive edges. So Buffalo needs to be able to play from in front, use their nickel defense to pressure the passer, cover, and do all those things. And I think, to me, this is a challenging game for them because it doesn't fit up. It doesn't fit that way. I mean, it's hard for them to really kind of control the ball. Now, Houston, the key is to get Mixon back, right? I mean, Mixon makes a huge difference for them in terms of the way he was playing in the run game, and they need to be able to run the ball. You can run the ball in Buffalo. One of the things about Buffalo is you can run it because they're so small. And I think Miller's effectiveness will show up if Buffalo has a lead in the fourth quarter, right, where they're up by 7 and Houston's trying to come back. And who's going to rush the pass? Greg Rosario? I mean, who else is going to do it, right? Espinosa? I mean, there's all different guys that have to kind of fill in the gaps, and it's challenging for them. So I think that's going to be the key. And when you look at these two teams, I think it's really important. Houston hasn't covered a game all year. Do you realize that, Grace? They have not covered a game all year.
Yeah, that's actually one. We
Go ahead.
didn't get to talk about that on our morning show today. It's surprising when you see the 0-4 record, but to me, it wasn't surprising because that's what I've been saying all year long is that this team is overvalued based on the success they had last season.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they are. I mean, but here's where they're different, right? So they're very good in the red area. They're the fourth best red zone team in football. So they're really good. They get the ball and they score touchdowns. And the other thing they're really good at doing is keeping the football. They've had the ball for 33 minutes, and their defense gets to play less defense. I mean, this is the most penalized team in the National Football League. So we talk about discipline, we talk about all those things. They're not. And so they're able to do that. But when they're defensively, if you get it in the red zone, it's a score. They're 20. Only the Jacksonville Jaguars couldn't score against them. They're 28th in the league in red zone defense. So they control the football with their offense. They do it without a really running game. I mean, since Mixon left, they haven't been able to do it. Now, the one thing we know about the Bills is the Bills have a struggle playing a run. I mean, in the other two games was a Buffalo played Miami and Arizona. They gave up over 130 yards rushing. So it wasn't like last week was an aberration. I mean, that you could run the ball in Buffalo because of their lack of size. So to me, the way I see this game going is I think it's got to be a track meet for Buffalo to win it, right? I think if it's a kind of where Buffalo only has the ball for 23 minutes, they're not going to be able to match it because they haven't made explosive plays. And you could say, well, losing Diggs really matters for them. Well, okay, yeah. Diggs averages what? I think Diggs is at 9.3 yards a catch. That really makes a difference. And he screwed up their offense because without Tank Dell now, who's been injured, right? I mean, Dalton Schultz was a critical player for him last year. He has 10 catches. He just has 16 targets in 4 games. He was a mainstay, but now they're trying to get the ball to Diggs. So it kind of makes it all a lot differently. I think Houston's a good, solid player. They play better at home. I think the one thing is without Von Miller, that pass rush won't be very good for Buffalo. But again, you're betting against Josh Allen. And it's always hard to bet against Josh Allen with a team that is not very good defensively and also is very penalized.
So even though the Bills' run defense has struggled, their pass defense does rank among the top 7 teams in the NFL. How do you think this matchup could go against the explosive Nico Collins?
Well, I think to me, let's break it down. You talked about in the last block about who have they played when we were talking about Tampa Bay. So they open up against Arizona, the mayor, who, if you keep him in the pocket, he can't make a throw. Next week, Tua gets hurt, so there's no pass offense in that game. Then they get way ahead of Jacksonville with Trevor Lawrence, who's, besides Anthony Richardson and Bryce Young, is the worst quarterback in the National Football League. And then last week, they played against Trevor Lawrence last week, and they were able to do that. So we really haven't seen, they went to Minnesota and they got torched by Minnesota, but playing on the road. But we really haven't, other than Sam Darnold, we haven't seen them play against a really good passing game, which I think Buffalo, we're not sure. Shakir's hurt, so that's a problem for them. And, they want to be in this what I call two-back offense because they're using Kincaid as kind of like the move guy, even though they're in 12 all the time. So they're like 11. I think it's going to be interesting. I mean, I think James Cook has got to run the football effectively, and they got to keep the Cook ball. And you can run the ball in Houston. There's no question.
Mm-hmm. Let's move ahead to some Cowboys injuries here. They are preparing to play without Micah Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence. Micah Parsons dealing with a high left ankle sprain. Lawrence now on the IR due to a Lisfranc injury to his right foot. I think what's impressive about Parsons' career, I just found this out this week, he has never missed a football game at any level in high school or college. This will be the first time for him. So what would these 2 losses on defense mean for the Cowboys against the Steelers?
Well, look, the Cowboys' problems that we talked about on our show, I mean, the Cowboys, people say, the Cowboys going to be interested in Davante Adams. Why? They have Brandon Cooks. They're paying him really good money. They redid his contract. They're not going to be interested in him. I mean, Dallas needs a running back. Dallas needs defensive linemen. They need defensive tackles. They don't need another receiver. I love this, that everybody's answer to every problem is just sign a receiver. I love that. It's the best. Just sign another receiver. That's really going to help us. Meanwhile, we can't stop them from running for 8 yards a clip. I mean, Dallas has no run game. They're the worst football team in the NFL in terms of time possession in the fourth quarter. They can't run the ball to control the lead. And so this is a tough matchup. I mean, they can't protect the run. And so Pittsburgh wants to run it. They don't want don't want Justin Fields to throw for 300 yards. They like him to throw for 230 yards. And they want to control the line of scrimmage. And then without Parsons, without Lawrence, who wasn't playing that great to begin with, without him in there, I mean, how do they rush the passer? Where do they get pressure from? And now it exposes the corners. I mean, this one problem after another sets up another problem for Dallas. And I think this is true, though. Dallas, when you can't run the ball, now Dak goes into Pittsburgh. He goes into that stadium there against that front who's healthy, coming off a loss. And now he's going to have to throw it 45 to 50 times. That's not a recipe for success against T.J. Watt and against Steele or against some rookie on the left side, Guyton. I mean, that's a hard thing to do. So I think this is a hard matchup for Dallas. Look, they can throw the football on Pittsburgh if you can protect. Dallas can't run the ball, so they're not even going to make it a attempt. It's like when we get to Baltimore and Cincy. Baltimore's strength is playing the run. Cincy don't want to run it, so it's easy for Cincy to call 50 passes. They got Joe Burrow. But it's not easy for Dallas. They need more balance. Dak Prescott's a good player, but he needs balance in his attack.
Right. And he's not living up to last year's MVP level numbers either. Of course, that it's not just him, it's the offense around him, but it's kind of tough when CeeDee Lamb is your only real threat. It makes it easier for defenses to scheme against. But at the same time, you look at who the Steelers defense has faced at quarterback. They faced a hobbled Kirk Cousins, his first game back from injury, Bo Nix, a hobbled Justin Herbert, and Joe Flacco. So maybe their stats are skewed a little bit as well. But I mean, even, regardless of how Dak's year is going, he's in another class compared to those guys, right? So interesting one is the Steelers a two. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think there's no question he's in another class. But, I mean, I think to me, you also have to look at this offensive line, right? I thought Flacco did a good job against them last week. I mean, but they're still – I mean, Shane Steichen calls those two runs, two passes. He gives them a chance to get back in the game. If it's not for that bad snap, I think Pittsburgh might have won that game. Because Steichen still, for whatever reason, Steichen has just completely eliminated game management from his portfolio, nor does he care about stopping the clock and all those things. All the things that we preach about here at the GM Shuffle, he doesn't give a shit about. Now, he won the game, he got fortunate, so it's going to reinforce it. But I think, to me, when you break down Pittsburgh, look, the one thing is Pittsburgh's always about – the game is simple, right? If Pittsburgh makes you throw it on 3 Mississippi, they're going to beat your ass. But if you can block T.J. Watt and make it 5 Mississippi, you can throw the ball on them. I mean, that's as simple as it can be. And I don't think Dallas can do that. I think the Giants played them tough. I think when you look at this Cowboy team, as I keep saying, they're not as talented as everybody wants to make them out to be. And now they lose Lawrence, who wasn't playing good to begin with. And now they lose Parsons, who's a really good player. I mean, now Pittsburgh and Arthur Smith doesn't have to come out and say, okay, who's got the mic? Who's got Parsons? How are we blocking this? What do we do when they line up in this double-A mug and Parsons here? What do we do when they line up the double-A mug and Parsons over there? That doesn't have to happen now because he's not in the game. So now we just block who you see, point out the mic, and let's go.
Steelers, a 2.5-point favorite at home. Do you have any leans or feeling about how this game will go?
I think it's a really good matchup for Pittsburgh. I think this week in the NFL, there's a lot of good matchups that you can really break down. And what I try to do every week before I make the picks on Russo is I try to see the game through my eyes, see how is this game going to go, and for me, I think you have to have balance to beat Pittsburgh. You got to be able, now I'm sure Dallas will come in and run a bunch of screens. They'll run a bunch of perimeter throws to try to make it look like they have a run game. But for me, I think it's hard to go into Pittsburgh knowing you can't run the football because they force you to not run. See, the best teams in the league force you to not run. Baltimore, Pittsburgh, they force you to not run. It's hard to run the ball. Since at Cleveland last year, you couldn't run the ball in Cleveland last year. But but when you eliminate one part of the offense that it sets up and it puts it into the strength of the Steelers, which is their ability to rush the passer, I think it's a hard game for Dallas. I think if it's a 40-45 pass game, I don't see how Dallas can win it. I really don't, Grace. And I think Pittsburgh will move the football effectively on Dallas.
So going back to something you said with the Davante Adams news, and I know we're up against the clock here, you really think Jerry Jones wouldn't want to make some type of splash, especially with Brandon Cooks dealing with a knee injury?
I don't think Jerry sees. I think you see receiver as his problem. I don't think Jerry sees it. They like Tolbert. I think they pay Cook says they like Tolbert. They got Jake Ferguson. I think America sees that they need a receiver. I see them needing a running back and needing a defense. If I'm going to take money and I only have, I mean, if I only have 10 cents to buy candy, I'm not going to buy a candy that I don't need. I'm going to buy a candy I want, right? And that's the way Jerry's looking at it. Meanwhile, everybody in America wants them to sign another receiver because that's the cure for everything. I mean, that's just the cure. If all you need to do is sign another receiver, see how that works out. See how it's working out for Jacksonville. How, it doesn't work, but everyone wants to do it.
You're listening to the GM Shuffle with Michael Lombardi, presented by DraftKings and VSiN.
Welcome back into the GM Shuffle, where we are getting you ready for NFL Week 5. And before we get into more game previews, we want to highlight Michael's newest article. You can find it over on vsin.com. It is titled, Why NFL Bettors Should Study the Fourth Quarter. And Michael, your argument is that the fourth quarter tells you the overall quality of a team. So through your research and studying various teams here at the end of the game, what did you learn?
Well, I think you learn that when the team has to throw the ball and they can throw it to come back in a game, they will. If a team needs to defend the pass and they can defend the pass at the end of the game. I mean, to me, the conditions in the fourth quarter are the perfect conditions for the true evaluation. And when you look at the Jacksonville Jaguars, for example, and you wonder, why can't they win a game? Well, they've scored 3 points in 4 games in the fourth quarter. Right. Last week against the Houston Texans, they got 1 first down in the fourth quarter. Overall, they got 2 first downs. Excuse me. They've converted only 1 third down in the fourth quarter all year. They're 1 for 9. They're 1 for 3 on fourth down, but God knows he's going to keep trying to go for it on fourth down. It's not going to stop them. Forget the numbers. I mean, this is what I love about analytics is, you base every decision on the numbers, but when the numbers don't work, it's this gambler's fallacy that comes into play. Well, eventually it's got to work. Right. I get that in basketball. I like it when I watch a basketball game, especially when I was a kid, when Larry Bird was playing. I wanted Larry Bird to be hot in the first quarter. I wanted him to have a great shooting night in the first, because I knew by the fourth he would eventually cool to the number that he writes to, the average. Right. Whereas, I don't think that's the gambler's fallacy. I think that's just playing to the number. Whereas when you think that just because you can't go for it on fourth down and get it, that eventually you're going to get it. Like the number, your every experience declares what your number is, right? Whereas Bird has a bunch of experience to declare his number. So that's not the gambler's fallacy. The gambler's fallacy is what Peterson's doing is, well, I'm going to keep going for it to get to my norm. Well, you don't have a norm. Your norm is right now it's 40%. Your norm on third down is 29th, and I think it's 30th in the National Football League. You're at 28% on third down. That's your norm. So every time you do something outside your norm and you cite analytics as the reason you're doing it, you're not looking at the numbers. You're only looking at selective numbers. And so it's like saying, okay, we live here in New Jersey and it's rained 4 days in a row. It's going to rain the 5th day, or it's going to rain the 6th. It's not going to rain tomorrow. Well, we don't know that, right? And the one thing is, what we don't understand is there's no, in these decisions, a flip of a coin doesn't try to balance it out. That's kind of how gamblers look at it. Okay, Minnesota's won 4 in a row. Eventually they're going to lose, so I'll bet against them this week. It balances out. Well, maybe it won't. Maybe they're just better than somebody else, right? And I think, to me, that's the biggest problem you come into is when you start doing these stupid decisions that Peterson makes in the fourth quarter, you're playing in a gambler's fallacy. You think you're going to get to a number that's not even existing, and you're doing it all under the umbrella of gambling. I mean, think about this. I mean, Andy Reid goes for it on fourth down 3 times. He's 3 for 3. He's got the best player in the league. He's got the MVP in the league, but he only has gone for a fourth down 3 times. But if he went for it on fourth down, the odds are he's probably going to get it because his numbers say there's a standard of excellence. And so the fourth quarter is all about what are you doing? It's a standalone game. For example, like Houston, they're 3-1. They've controlled the ball for 62% of the fourth quarter. Meanwhile, Indianapolis is 1-3. They can't hold on to the ball. They're 33% in the fourth, right? They can't. Dallas, if Dallas has a lead against Pittsburgh, for example, Dallas only holds the ball for 37% of the fourth quarter. That means it's going to give Pittsburgh ample time to get back into the game. Same thing with Atlanta. We have them tonight. Atlanta only holds the ball in the fourth quarter 40%. Now, if Dennis Allen kicks the field goal and then he scores the second touch, now he's going to win the game. But he turned down the field goal and he got a touchdown later. But Atlanta did nothing in that fourth quarter other than make one drive, make 20 yards on a penalty to get themselves in a field goal range. So I think you really have to study the fourth quarter. I think you really need to look deeply into the fourth, and I think you need to understand how many first downs a team gets in the fourth, what they do on time of possession, because when the game is on the line, that means that each coordinator has to make really good calls. Each coordinator has to be really prepared. Each coordinator has to anticipate the game situation. And because of that, you get a clear indication of what the game is.
One part in your article that I liked probably the most is you said the essence of the game is all about how to approach each quarter. And then you go on to explain the difference between your first quarter approach, your second and third quarter approach, and then now you just said the fourth quarter is a standalone game. So could you explain to the listeners the difference between the first and then second, third quarter approaches?
All right, so let's take a game last week. Let's take the Jets game versus Denver. The first quarter was the very first play of the game. Nathaniel Hackett got blitzed. Okay, and he got blitzed with a run. He had nobody to block him. And Rodgers, I think he might have thrown the ball away or he took the sack. He took the sack, right? And so now you come to the sideline in the first quarter and you have a really good idea about what Vance Joseph wants to do against you. Now you got to adjust it. Now you have to adjust it. Now, okay, here's what we're getting, these kind of blitzes. Here's what they want to do. They're trying to attack our protections. So now the first quarter is assessment. The second and the third, you adjust it. The fourth quarter, here's what we have to do to win the game. And it may be something uncommon. We may have to go for it on 4th and 15. We may have to do something completely ridiculous, but we're trying to win the game. And so that's how the game should go. But if you don't do that, let's take the Jets sideline. The Jets come out and they try to run the ball against Denver. They can't. Do they change their running game? No. They just keep trying to run the same runs that they run without really an adjustment or understanding, whereas Denver could not run the ball in the first half, not a lick. In the second half, all of a sudden, they found a run game. So to me, that's all about how you adjust it out. And that's what we're talking about, the coaches adjusting. It's not – people get so caught up in plays, right? They get so caught up in, well, we need to run this play or that play, or we need to throw this or throw that or run this and run that. No, it's how do you coach the play against what they're doing. So if they're doing something that you weren't prepared for, fix it on the sideline. Or you have to have it in your game plan that you can fix it. It's not new plays. It's fix the plays you already have. You've already practiced. And that comes out of adjustment. That comes from seeing the game. That's why all these guys who have been Mayo's 5 years being a coach. He's not ready to make any adjustments on the sideline. Antonio Pierce is not ready to go over and say to his coordinator, here's what we need to do. Here's how we have to approach this. They don't have enough experience to do it. It's not a knock on them. It's just a reality. They have no experience to do it. So that's what it's all about. And that's why the fourth quarter, when you study fourth quarters, you really get an essence of who the team is. You really know who they are and what they're capable of. Example, 49ers, they couldn't stop the Rams from throwing the football. That's an indication of their lack of pass rush, right? The Rams were able to protect. It was late in the game. They were tired. They couldn't do it. And so, and you take a look at like New Orleans. New Orleans can control the ball in the fourth quarter. That's why they were able to get back in the game.
Producer Elliot put together some lists of the top 5 teams in scoring margin in the fourth quarter and the bottom 5 teams in fourth quarter scoring margin. So the top 5, there's a tie at the top. Bears, Packers have a plus 4.5 scoring margin in the fourth quarter. Then it's the Browns, the Broncos, the Jets, Cowboys. The bottom 5 in fourth quarter scoring margin, the Vikings, Ravens, Titans, Panthers, Jaguars. So some are expected, some not so much. What is your reaction to those lists?
Well, again, that's why you have to look at every game specifically, right? You just can't go by the numbers, right? So Minnesota, in their games, their opponent wasn't the other team. It was the clock. So they were more interested in running the clock out than they were. Same thing with Baltimore. Baltimore may not want to score in the fourth. They just want to run time off the clock. Meanwhile, Tennessee's a really good indication. They can't play catch-up. They can't throw the ball. That's why they're minus in the fourth quarter. So you every game, Jacksonville can't throw the ball. They can't throw. They can't protect. They can't run it. That's the thing. Whereas now, conversely, some teams that are behind in games, they have to play catch up, and they're better in the fourth quarter. That's why their fourth quarter numbers are high. So it isn't one stat for all. It's you really have to look at the game books and print out the fourth quarter and just look at that fourth quarter and study it and say, okay, this is the situation. Here's what happened. Shane Steichen decides to throw it twice, give him the ball back. Doug Peterson gets the ball with 3:51 to go. He runs it on first down. He gets -1 yards. Okay, so with Doug, it's easy to forget about the run game. I'm just going to go start calling passes. And then he runs 2 incomplete passes, and now he's punting the ball back with 2:50. He doesn't even take a minute off the clock. So now you see everything, and now you can kind of get an idea. So when you print out those game books in the fourth quarter, you really get a good idea about how the team behaves and what they're doing and how they've taken over the game. Baltimore, you couldn't stop the Raiders from throwing the ball in the fourth quarter. That's okay, so that's a problem. You identified a problem. You can't run the ball in the Ravens, but you can throw it, and it's pretty obvious Dallas did the same thing to them.
I know looking at these, it's a little tricky because the Vikings, I mean, they're typically up big throughout these games
Yeah,
and
right.
fighting the clock, as you say. Ravens, well, I mean, we know they have problems like letting teams back into the game in the fourth quarter. So that kind of makes sense why they're at the bottom here. But then the teams at the top, Browns, Broncos, Jets, Cowboys, I mean, they're always trying to fight their way back at the end of the game. So they got to score in the fourth quarter or they're toast.
All right, the Browns are really, that's a good point, Grace. The Browns are really deceiving. The Browns had a chance to beat the Giants in the fourth quarter, couldn't do it, right? The Browns had a chance to beat the Raiders in the fourth quarter, couldn't do it. I mean, the Browns could easily, they're in the fourth quarter and they can't win a close game. Now in the fourth quarter against Jacksonville, what they did against Jacksonville was they got the ball with about 7 minutes to go in the fourth quarter. And they ran that thing all the way down to under 2 minutes and only got 2 first downs. They only got 2 first downs, and they didn't even get in the field goal range. They got penalties that kicked them out of it. So they were able to control a lot of the time in the clock to be able to win that game. So to me, that's where I would not say Cleveland's a good fourth quarter. Cleveland's a really shitty fourth quarter team. So is Chicago, because if Chicago's behind in the game, he's not going to be able to complete passes over 15 yards. He's proven so far this year he struggles to do that. Same thing with Denver. I mean, you don't want Bo Nix throwing it 50 times. So you have to be careful. It's not just who scores, it's who controls the game. See, Cleveland they could have come back in that game, and they didn't, but they controlled the ball in the Jacksonville game. Jacksonville's just bad in the fourth. And then you could see them defensively too.
All right, we've talked about several of these teams today. Now it's time to get into the game previews themselves. We're going to take a break, but coming up on the other side of the GM Shuffle, we're getting into the Ravens, the London game, Colts, Jags, Browns, Commanders. So many previews coming up next. You're listening to the GM Shuffle.
You're listening to the GM Shuffle with Michael Lombardi, presented by DraftKings and VSiN.
Welcome back into the GM Shuffle. We're going to start our breakdowns of these Week 5 NFL games, starting with a divisional matchup between the Ravens and the Bengals. Baltimore, a 2.5 road favorite as we record this podcast on Thursday. Michael, Ravens, they had their run-heavy approach on offense, against a injured Bengals defensive line. Lots of injuries there. Trey Hendrickson, probably the biggest one. How do you feel about that matchup in this game?
Well, I think this is kind of an interesting of two different teams, right? I think the Ravens need to run the football to be successful. The Bengals can't really run the football, can't protect the run, don't play the run very well. And then conversely, Cincy wants to throw the ball every snap, and the Ravens play great run defense, so that's not going to deter them. So it's kind of a two different variables, right? And what's really interesting is we haven't seen Lamar go against Joe Burrow very much at all. I mean, they faced each other 5 times in their career. Jackson's 4-1 straight up and 3-2 against the spread. But the last time they played in Cincinnati was a 27-24 game where the Ravens were a 3.5-point underdog. So we don't get to see this combination very much. But I think this is one team's going to have to throw it. and can keep throwing it. The other team wants to control the clock and run it. And I think this game's going to be in the fourth quarter. Tucker hasn't been that impressive. I don't know if I trust McPherson either, although he's just missed one kick. I think it's a fourth quarter game. I think you have to take the points in the home team here. I think that's kind of the case. I mean, you want Lamar as an underdog, but when he's a favorite by more than 3 points, he's 21-31. So I know this is 2.5 point spread, but I think to me, since he's got to play really good run defense, and Baltimore will struggle if this is a 40 pass game or a 35 pass game. And then can Baltimore cover these receivers with T. Higgins back? I think Mims playing right tackle for Cincinnati has helped them. I think having Chase and along with Higgins going back, I mean, they don't want to run the ball anyway. So why waste a run play? Why waste a play calling a run against Baltimore? Just keep chucking it. You're going to find ways to make plays and protect. And if they do that, I think Cincy wins the game.
Yeah, I was about to ask you about Cincinnati's offense because we had so many questions about them through weeks 1 and 2. They've put up 30 points in the last 2 weeks. It came against the Washington and Carolina defenses, so not sure how legitimate that is. But the Ravens just made Josh Allen look human last week. So what could they do to Joe Burrow?
Well, I mean, they basically got in front of Josh Allen and then they took away. I think to me, this is a game where if they can rush Burrow, but Burrow is really good in the pocket, right? I mean, Burrow is really good. I think Baltimore is the classic team, and I know we say this quite a bit on the podcast, but they really have to play from in front. I mean, they don't want to get into a drop back pass game, and that would favor Cincinnati. So Cincinnati's got to start fast. I think they've got to try to play with the lead, and they got to do all that. So for me, it comes down to style of play, but I think this is a fourth quarter game. I really do. I think it's going to go one way or the other. And if you're getting points with the home team, I think that's probably the right call to make. It opened up Baltimore -1. It got bet up to 2.5 now. I just think to me, the one thing I know about Cincy is they're throwing the football better. They're in better rhythm. I don't trust their head coach, especially in these tight games, making the right decisions. I think that's been proven out. I mean, Zach Taylor's 4-6 against Mike Tomlin. He's 1-1 against Freddie Kitchens. He's 4-7 against John Harbaugh, and he's 2-6 against Kevin Stefanski. Case closed.
Mm-hmm. Let's take a look at the Jets Vikings. Minnesota a 2.5 point favorite, but this game is in London.
Yeah,
I'm kind of bummed about that. I'm over these international games, Michael.
Why? They're good. They're fun. I love watching. I love the reaction of the fans over there.
It's bad football.
Well, you know why
I'll
it's
tell you.
bad.
Okay,
go ahead.
No, I was going to say
ahead.
the reason I'm bummed is because I have the Jets win total, and I think if this game were in Minnesota, it would be a different story because, I mean, Brian Flores' defense, one of the best, obviously, but Aaron Rodgers has seen everything. Now they have to travel across the pond on a short week. I just don't like it.
Yeah, well, he's beat up too. He got the crap beat out of him, And look, Aaron Rodgers is experienced, but he didn't see that blitz coming off the edge in the last play of the Denver game. He didn't see the blitz coming at him in the first play of the game. So sometimes experience can get you fooled, and Flores isn't going to run the same game plan. What worries me about this game, Grace, is the field. I think it's from a handicapping standpoint. How do you handicap this field? Because we know when they go over there, the fields look beautiful. They always do. The field in Brazil looked wonderful. But they play like shit. There's no pass rush. You can't get a grip. And if that's the case, then I think the Jets have a clear advantage in terms of throwing the football. But look, let's face it, the Jets have no explosiveness on offense. I mean, what I thought, what Garrett Wilson said the other day is really true. I think what people forget about the Jets is this offseason, the Jets tried to hire an offensive coordinator or someone to come in and help Nathaniel Hackett expand the offense. So when Garrett Wilson comes out and says, well, I don't see us doing much different. We're not very creative. And then he had to backtrack it. Well, he was speaking honestly. I mean, the Jets offense is very pedestrian. It's day one install of the West Coast offense. There's no creativity or magic to it. And so they have no explosive plays. I think their longest pass, no, I don't think. I know their longest pass play is 39 yards. So Rodgers is great and he still throws the ball really well, but they're going to have to figure out how to get open. They got the shit kicked out of them by a really good front of Denver. I think people don't realize how good Denver's defensive front is. I think Denver really gave it to them. So I agree with you. It's hard to win over there. I always go against. It's hard to go against the home team over there or the favorite. I think it does have an advantage. Now here's the other thing: the Jets come back and play Buffalo next week. The Jets chose to not take the bye after going to London. They're going to come back and play one of the hardest games of the year against Buffalo. I'm sure Bobby Saleh will have their raincoats. Look, I hope he has their raincoats up there. I really do. I hope he's got them, because it might rain. Somebody might want to tell Bobby it's going to rain. It's London. That's why they have the London fog jacket, because it's foggy. I just might want to tell him.
Right. I feel like we should update the whole Saleh Aaron Rodgers story as well, since we talked about it on Monday's pod. Saleh ended up backtracking those comments, saying,
of course he did.
It was never a cadence issue. It was created. Who created it?
Yeah, well, of course that's Bobby for you. Bobby goes out there and just talks. Bobby is fire, aim, that's who he is. He doesn't really, he has no ability to really think about what he's saying. He can't wait to get to the press conference because the spotlight's on him. Oh, I get to talk. Maybe you should be calculated in what you're saying here. Maybe you should think about it a little bit before you come out and say something stupid. But look, we wrote about it for the Daily Coach today on Thursday that, this is clear case of no culture. When you have a great culture, you don't have different opinions on different things. I mean, we see Garrett Wilson has an opinion of the offense. Now he backtracked on it, right? We see Aaron Rodgers say maybe we hold people accountable. Then we see Bobby say that there's no big deal. Come on. What is it? It's bad culture. You want to bet on that? I mean, I admire you for taking the over win total. On paper, it looks good, but they got to do it on the field.
It was before I knew about all this dysfunction.
Yeah, right. Well, it's always been there with Bobby. You're not a 34% winning percentage coach without it. I mean, Big Bobby, he's got 4 years in. But the media loves him. They think he's wonderful because he's nice and friendly but the reality of every Jet fan knows that they're not going to win a Super Bowl with him as the coach.
Okay, speaking of coaches getting up on podiums and saying the wrong thing, Doug Peterson now calling out his players saying, as coaches, we can't go out there and make the plays, right? Meanwhile, his Jags 0-4, but they are the home favorite by 3 points against the Colts. What's your key to this game?
Well, look, he said the locker room's fully behind him. I think it's really bad when you come out and say that about the players. Look, your production in the fourth quarter, it's not just a player issue, right? It's players, coaches, and scheme. There's three things that go into the game. And I think, to me, that's an issue. And so they're bad in all three. I mean, you can dial them up. Look, Trevor Lawrence misses a throw, but somebody else might miss a block, and, you might have a bad call. You're not prepared for the fourth quarter. I think anybody that I talk to that watches tape on Jacksonville, they don't see a well-coached, well-designed team. I think they see a lot of flaws in their team, and that reflective of the coaches. So, and then they can't play defense. They're hurting on defense. They can't cover anybody. It's really hard. I think this is a game. Indy goes down there. It depends on who plays quarterback, whether it's Flacco or Richardson. But Indy's going to get trouble trying to stop the run. I think there's a reason why Jacksonville's favorite, because Bigsby can run the ball. If they called runs with Etienne and Bigsby, they would help their offense a great deal.
Evan Ingram is back too for the Jags. First time we have wide receiver 1 and 2 for Trevor Lawrence.
Well, there you go. It's an answer to all your problems. You just add another receiver to the team. That's all we need to do. Meanwhile, he can't block anybody, right? He's a good player. He can't block anybody, but he does give. I think he and Lawrence have some confidence in each other.
Yeah, they're boys. They've talked about that before. So, and Trevor Lawrence is playing with low confidence. You can see it in his body language. So maybe that does provide a little boost.
Yeah,
let's get to your DraftKings bet highlight presented by DraftKings. DraftKings, the crown is yours. You're looking at the Broncos-Raiders game with Denver, a 2.5-point road favorite. Which side are you taking here?
No, they're a home favorite, Grace. They're playing at home. They're not a Legion.
Oh, I'm sorry. It was written backwards. Sorry. Yeah, you're right.
They're playing at home. They've been on the road for 2 weeks, and so they're at home. Look, I was really impressed with their defense last week. I really was impressed with the way the Broncos attacked. I think they can cover. I think Surtain can take whether it's Jacoby's out of the game, I think they could do that. I think they can protect the middle of the field. I think they'll attack. They'll attack Gardner Minshew. I think they'll be able to do that, and I think they can win up front. I mean, the Raiders' offensive line isn't very good. And then, obviously, you're always nervous about taking Bo Nixon and their inability to really move the football. But I think, Sean has gotten beaten by the Raiders twice last year. They haven't. I think they're like 1-9 against the Raiders. At some point, they got to turn the tide here. I'm going to go with the better coach. I'm going to go with the better defense, and I'm going to go with some internal problems at the Raiders, and I'll make this the DraftKings crowning moment.
Yeah, that's what caught my attention. Raiders are just in free fall at this point. I mean, you have Max Crosby not showing up, Devante Adams, and Antonio Pierce doesn't know what to say at the podium. Too many distractions. So I like where you're going. Go with the better coach in this spot. Go with the things we know. Broncos have a good defense and better coach. Okay, so Broncos covering is the DraftKings bet highlight. That's going to do it for this episode on the GM Shuffle. Please download and subscribe wherever you listen to your pods. If you're watching on DraftKings YouTube, please hit the thumbs up button on your way out. For Michael Lombardi, I'm Grace Remington. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you back here on Monday.